And live, and off we go. And here we are, Charles Moscowitz. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Dooovid is here, and we do this often on Thursdays around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I just had a really amazing interview earlier with Ralph Griffith, who served 7 years in federal prison with Bernie Madoff and with Jonathan Pollard and other high-level prisoners, including some mobsters and other figures. And he's writing books about it, and a really interesting guy. Had a lot of interesting insights into Bernie Madoff, who is now apparently in hospice, and he's in near death. And he talked about just who he was and what he was like. You can now watch that on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to be doing a series with Ralph. Dooovid, so what's happening with you? I just want to mention that as part of my book club, we read a book by Shulem Deen. This is All Who Go Do Not Return. I'm going to hold it up for people to see this. And this book is about his life in the Skverer Hasidic community in New Square in New York, and his eventual falling out with that community. And now he's sort of, he completely says he lost his faith. He's completely unaffiliated. And, he's left it, and he's part of a growing community, he says, that's primarily in New York, where they actually have an organization of former Hasids who are trying to adjust to life. And it's just a very interesting insight into life in that particular group, that particular sect, which is very, very strict and which is known to be, even amongst Hasids, it's a real tragedy as a story, because he ended up not just divorcing his wife, but losing complete access or contact with his 5 children. So, Dooovid, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Charles. And I used to know, I used to deal with a lot of Hasidim from all levels, including, so to say, off the derrick. I was like an original member of Cholent in Manhattan. I went to all sorts of alternative minyanim. I promoted music concerts, events that brought together Jews of all stripes, largely, to see a Jewish rock band, which, obviously Charles knows something about.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different dynamics. And also I lived in Borough Park, and I knew a lot of kids that, that most of the kids I knew, I was in Bubba Yeshiva, and we had a construction program. I taught kids how to use construction equipment and various things. I taught people how to drive. And there's all layers of how people want to raise their kids from, Hasidic perspective. And saying, like, your name's Moscowitz, is saying, like, I knew a lot of Moscowitzes that even questioned whether they want to teach their kids English.
Yes.
And it's in America, some of these successful business people, but they did not want English to be their first language, and the lifestyle. And there is a strand in Judaism of major sects, maybe comparison to, God forbid, not like West Barrow Baptist Church, but because really it's common among all sorts of religious that if the kids don't want to follow the path, you got to bounce them out. You got to sever connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's mainstream, but there's an element, like probably even 10% or more, that you basically have that like, no, you're no longer Orthodox. You can't be part of the community. It's all dependent upon everybody following this ritualistic law, and kind of like a recreation of what it's like in Europe. And here in America, rabbis only have voluntary power, and that people are religiously Jewish completely out of our own free will. There could be community pressure, but legally
Right.
Rabbis have no authority. So, but there's community pressure, and probably, partially, it probably goes back in Europe. We probably bounced people out of the ghetto if they didn't keep Sabbath, and not like, just Spinoza, but just, people
Sure.
have large families, people have 10 kids. And so it's pretty common. New Square is more, so to say, extreme in the sense that they might, just cut him off completely. They don't want him bringing in any secular influences, and that will mean that he'll God forbid, never be able to see the kids for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And so that's an element among the ultra Orthodox. So there's all sorts of interesting dynamics. The one thing is, like, this guy who, the OTD guy from New Square, probably understands Judaism, better than even your average conservative rabbi, maybe even your
Sure.
modern Orthodox rabbi. They brought up in the system, studying Talmud, saying the prayers, spending hours every day. So to say, like, if you went, like Shulem Deen could probably pray the majority of your
easily.
prayer services by memory,
Easily.
even though he doesn't care about it anymore, as where your average conservative rabbi probably couldn't do that even if they wanted to. So there's all sorts of interesting dynamics. So as an OTD, he kind of becomes like a leader in the greater Jewish community from an old school, because he's actually knowledgeable of what it means, so to say, to be a Jew, as where your average American Jew just isn't knowledgeable about that.
Oh yeah, no, very knowledgeable. And one of the things that struck me about his story, and one of the things he reveals about that community is, and it sort of goes to what you're saying, Dooovid, that there was not hardly any secular education in that, and the little bit that they did have of English and math and regular subjects, the teacher was kind of frowned on and made fun of and looked down on, and a lot of young people didn't participate at all. Now, in the case of Shulem Deen, he did participate in it, and his parents were Bel Shuva, so they were not growing up in it. So I think he did have some sensibilities a little bit outside of the community, and which is why maybe it helped him survive better. But in a way, I mean, these people, the people that come out of it, they don't have any skills. I mean, they cannot get a job doing anything or other than simply studying Torah, which is a wonderful thing, but they're not functional in general society. And one of the people in my book group made the observation, which I thought was good, that it's comparable in a way to the Amish people of Pennsylvania and upstate New York, in that they're kind of off the grid, and but the difference is that with the Amish, they actually have a profession. They're agricultural. I mean, they have farms and they understand business. And so, they're ultra religious, but they're also, they're able to operate. And if they can leave. In fact, they have a period where they do leave for a year and then they come back or not come back. But in the case of the Skverer community, which I think, again, it's maybe, as you say, a bit more extreme than any of the others, they're really like trapped in it. I mean, there's no alternative. They've got nothing. They're so totally separated from all other communities and so sequestered that they don't know anything else. They can't do anything else.
Yeah, I would completely disagree. In fact, I had a friend in Satmar, older man who learned Torah and even Kabbalah with from a Schwartz, a large Satmar family, and he used to say, the rabbi said that there's more business sense on Lee Avenue in Williamsburg than in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and to some extent, your average Satmar Hasid has a better intuitive understanding of business than a Harvard graduate. And
I think the Satmars are in the diamond business, aren't they? I mean, they do have businesses.
Well, I was saying you're saying they don't have skills.
Well, I'm talking maybe about the Skveras.
I would say, because it's an anti-Semitic canard, and like even I thought mentioned this, that from my audience, everyone thought like you didn't want to stream with me because like we had such a big argument, and it was like, no, that's nothing. That's like a common conversation I have like in synagogue. Like that's why I love being Jewish, because that's what we do. But like people thought like I guess you had some sort of strike for something related to the vaccine, but people thought it was because our argument. I think that's a good thing. But say like the anti-Semitic canard. Like I still joke to some people in different surroundings that I went to a special school that trains people how to become landlords. It's called yeshiva, and so
Right.
that's an anti. But I say like no, like I studied in Bubba yeshiva, and I would stand by that. That if you want to be a landlord, you probably get a better education in Bubba yeshiva and Satmar yeshiva than at Harvard, and it comes from a long thousands of years of history of being landlords, and the secrets to it are to somewhat hidden in our texts. And even as a business person, like it's part of the training. You're saying like you're saying I was in Bubba Yeshiva teaching people how to use construction equipment, and these were kids that
that's good.
They saw at a young age, like already like 10, 12 years old, they're teenagers that weren't going to be rabbis, that weren't going to learn, and people who don't approve of university, like Jehovah's Witness.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying, like, I had this argument with Luke Ford the other day. They were saying that most people are proud of their own culture. And so, like, no, unfortunately, especially Jews, a lot of Jews are down on our own culture. We're embarrassed of our own culture. And a lot of Jews think the culture of, the European man is better than our own culture. But, historically, the Ashkenazic, the Hasidic Jew, we did middleman professions. And it's like I used to joke about 770 not as an anti-Semitic canard, that 770 has produced more life insurance salesmen, agents than any other institute in the history of the world. And it might be true.
Right. That and former
endorsed life insurance.
I would say life insurance also was taken on by the former Confederate generals. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm glad to hear that because
he didn't want his Hasidim become.
No, that's wonderful, and I'm glad to know that.
The becoming life insurance.
Sure.
The Rebbe said that that's a good,
to make a living,
honorable profession for an Orthodox Jew, and factually, there are thousands and thousands of Lubavitch, and in fact, like even here in Metro Detroit, we dominate the field. Saying like in life insurance in Metro Detroit, even though Orthodox Jews are, there's a sizable chunk here, but like maybe even like 10-20% of life insurance agents.
No, I mean it's an honorable deal. Yeah,
yeshiva,
absolutely.
So if that's an anti-Semitic canard,
not at all. Why would it be? And
so I am pushing back on what.
Well, I think that I'm only going by.
New Square
That's right.
Like
New
like
Square.
One, because New Square had Hillary Clinton in the government, and they were kind of like a welfare state, as opposed to Satmar,
which is a little bit more industrious. But no, I think that
City,
Shulem Deen is talking about New Square and about the Skverer sect, and I think your point's well taken, in that most of them are very much, they're entrepreneurial, they're into business, they understand the function of
China.
I mean,
have a better chance doing business in China going to Orthodox yeshiva than to Harvard.
But what he describes, and again, this might be unique to the Skverers, and in all fairness, we should hear their side of the story if they would ever talk to me, which I doubt. But putting that aside. That they were unskilled. They also were they were somewhat of a welfare state, in that they were getting all sorts of public benefits, and they were using scams to get those benefits that actually involved several of their leaders going to prison years earlier. And that, he was actually taught to fill out documents in such a way that would qualify him for welfare programs that were fraudulent. And that basically the other thing that he implies in his book is that, in a way, you have some people involved in the Skverer movement who are very corrupt in a lot of ways, including, seeing prostitutes and whatever. But that all of that kind of is, they look
Clinton. I mean, the history, like the biggest.
They'll look the other way. As long as you respect the Rebbe, and as long as you live the lifestyle while you're there, and you put on the appearance of a strict, observer, then they don't really care about the other things, which is partially his criticism, although he doesn't come right out and say that. But the tragedy of the story is that, he was excommunicated from the community because they said that he had influenced the son of one of the prominent families to leave. And that this son, apparently the father had been beating him all his life, and there was a horrible family, but they were very influential, very central to the Skverers, and that the son had confided in him, and he had apparently influenced him, and he didn't deny that. And that the son went on to become a chemical engineer. He left completely, and he totally dropped out. So he's excommunicated, and him and his wife and 5 children then moved to Muncie because that's a nearby community. But he continued to drift away. I mean, he continued to go into Manhattan, and he got a job, and he got involved with the internet, and he became like an underground internet, dissident. And he continued to push the envelope to the point where eventually they got a divorce, and then he was eventually, the wife stopped speaking to him except through an intermediary, and the children stopped speaking to him. And now he has no contact with the children at all. And his main regret in that regard was that he should have, at the time that he got divorced, he should have hired a lawyer and had a formal secular divorce, which would have given him rights to see the children. But he just trusted her, and he trusted the community, and that they basically, completely shut him out. And it's a terrible story. I mean, he has no access at all to his 5 children. He didn't even know that his daughter had gotten married. I mean, nothing. I mean, completely, shunned. And yeah, I mean, look, to an extent that can happen in any community. And, but in this case, when you get such a high, such a rarefied community that is so tight and so controlled and so shut off, it becomes much more extreme. I mean, I experienced situations in my own life where I was shunned even recently because I'm an open and unabashed supporter of President Trump, right? I mean, there's people like, oh, you're a traitor. They don't want to talk to me anymore. They look the other way. They go to the other side of the street when they see me coming. But, it's very mild compared to what he dealt with. And I only bring that up to note that this is a darker side of human nature. We tend to congregate with people that make us comfortable in our beliefs by finding other people that share those beliefs. And we tend to shut away those who might in any way bring those beliefs into question, not necessarily deliberately, but just because they exist, because we don't want to think of outside of a narrow existence. Now, I'm not like that, but a lot of people are.
Yeah, so I would make 2 interesting points, and actually I know a lot about this because I did community relations for Hasidim. I drove around Arab truck, building permits, all sorts of things, and you could look at it one way, like you don't actually have any stake in this game, just because you're a Jew and they're a Jew. They're just a sect of people that wants to live the way that they see fit here in America, and they do it according to their understanding of what they think Judaism is. And you, just because you're a Jew and have a different understanding of what Judaism is, you think you have a stake in, so to say, them more so like than Amish or Muslim sect. And then like they probably are your 3rd or 4th cousins or whatever, and saying like, but legally from a U.S. perspective, besides the fact that they don't have any natural right to the land, if you looked at them like an Indian reservation and basically like a post-Holocaust gift to the Jews from America, that as Americans, we allowed these Hasidim to preserve their way of life in America, somewhat similar to a Native American tribe. That they don't have to speak.
It's a fair example, yeah. No, that's
to educate their kids. I mean, they don't have a right to that land like Native Americans. They
right.
Just, and from that perspective, it's a good thing what they're doing. Like God
sure.
forbid Shulem Deen, when his parents joined that community, they knew what they were getting into. They knew the rules, and the fact that they kicked him out is a positive thing. It gives me more respect for New Square. Like God bless New Square that they kicked him out.
And I think he understood.
Don't let them see their kids. He probably would ruin them.
Well,
and as a right-wing Jew, you're saying that's their right to raise their kids the way they see fit, and if he doesn't want to be a part of it, they have a right to banish him.
I agree. No, I think, and he even understood that. He was no longer in. Like no. I agree with that. I mean, he was no longer in sync with their community and with their belief system, which they have a right to, and I don't dispute that. Neither did he, and he understood that he should go. I mean, he was actually, relieved over it because he was no longer in sync. He was no longer a believer. He no longer respected this Rebbe, and he had reasons for that. And so, yeah, he should have gone. He would have had a corrupting influence inside the community. But I do draw a line in terms of his right to have access to his children. I mean, I think that's wrong, even if he is a heretic, as they say. And technically,
they put it in a difficult situation. That
yeah, I mean,
having access to his kids probably means the expulsion of the community from his kids. So it's like, you want your kids to be part of the community.
Well,
you want your kids.
That's but I think that's
just like you saying to a convert, to look forward to somebody, like, you got to be Orthodox. And if you stop being Orthodox, you're not a Jew anymore. I'm sorry. That's what it means.
Understood, but still, you have a father and
Shulem
children.
Deen, it's basically like that. Like,
No.
Your kids, if they don't follow these rules, we don't consider them Jews. This is a Jewish community. Judaism is partially based on genetics, but it's partially based on keeping these rules. And if you don't keep the rules, you will be expelled, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you look at this book, and I read the book carefully, it is very interesting. He did maintain at least those rules while he was visiting his children. I mean, even though he personally was not involved in it anymore, he did keep the kosher home. He did keep everything. They started to like come down on him.
You're not talking about sending your kids to a modern Orthodox yeshiva.
No. And the kids continued to live.
That don't want their kids speaking English.
No, I understand that.
We live in America, but honestly, I do not want my kids to speak English. If they learn English, it's only a thing I'm teaching them because the government is forcing them.
Yeah, but he wasn't trying to influence. He wasn't
talking about your modern Orthodox local shul where it's like they don't really keep the halacha.
No. But Dooovid, I understand that,
where
and
everything is based upon the observance.
Yeah,
of these
and
rules,
I get it, and I respect it.
To the full T, the society doesn't. It's going to.
No, and I respect that, and look, they're trying to be observant, and they're trying to be believers, and I respect that immensely, even though it's not what my choice. I have nothing but respect for that, and I'm not criticizing that. My point is that in his case, they started to come down on him with a microscope. Like there was one situation where during the Kol HaMoed of Pesach, he had a day with the children, and he brought them to Six Flags, and they were having a great time. And he ran out of Shemura matzah, so he had some store-made matzah, and perfectly kosher, not kosher enough for them. And this was used as an example for why he had to be cut off from his children. I'm only pointing that out because I think that maybe if he had been a little bit more in a position of influence in that community, they might not have done that to him. They might have given him a little bit of leeway, because I do think that he was
understanding for how the
I get it, but I also think he was trying to observe.
You have eyes on you 24/7. You don't get. I mean, it's a communal type group, so you don't get your own personal freedom to do things that other people don't know about.
No, I understand.
When you're looking at that, you say no. Like if you live in New Square, you don't get to do anything, zero, that other people don't know about. And so, at the point, like it doesn't matter.
Well, by the way,
when he's there,
I'm not even sure.
Zero difference, and so it's like you call it
Dooovid, I'm not even sure that's true even in New Square, in that there is a certain level of, autonomy when one is behind their own closed doors. Like, for example, in his case, they did get a television, even though the wife, didn't want him to. They did it, and they watched TV together. And, they got some of these modern conveniences, and they did get the internet, even though, again, the wife protested. She still was looking at email, and it was okay because they were not talking about it. They were not advertising it. They were doing it in the privacy of their own home. And I think probably a lot of people in that community, when they're in their private home, there's maybe not exactly of a complete level of observance that's expected in public. It had more to do with also the fact that they did not want to buck the system publicly, and the wife was totally into the system. I mean, she grew up in it. I mean, there was no deviation for her. He, on the other hand, didn't, and he broke away. And I guess that I understand your point. Maybe ultimately, because he was no longer going to be playing ball with New Square, maybe that would have been justification for his losing his 5 children. I don't know. I mean, to me, that seems like the family and the father-children relationship. I think ultimately trumps everything. But that's maybe me. And I even think I could argue it from a Jewish perspective. As long as he was not in any way trying to disrupt or influence the children in a negative way toward their community, which he wasn't. He was not at all. I mean, he was completely observant with them. But yet at the same time, so I think that from a moral standpoint, you have to give the family, the father and the mother, a certain amount of leeway. And so I do think that, I think they were wrong about that.
I'm not even joking. I'm looking more as a, minding my own business and those people having the right to live life as they see fit, even if they're completely wrong. So let's say, as a Jew, my conclusion is that most of the people in New Skverer, they're not actually Jewish. They're from some sort of Christian European conversion. They're largely descended from converts, European converts to Judaism, and their conversions are probably largely invalid. So I'm looking at them like Black Israelites. They just got their sect, and they want to see their way fit of life. From my perspective, they're probably not even Jews, and they're not practicing Judaism properly at all. However, they have a right to live their life as they see fit.
No question.
And just because I don't think they're even Jews in the first place, honestly, have you been there? I've been to New Skverer. I remember at a tish there, thousands of people. I would say half of them had blue eyes. There's no way that in New Skverer, half of those people with blue eyes.
Well, look, there's intermarriage in Judaism in every generation.
And let's say they're like the Amish, and we're just saying, God forbid, they're Holocaust survivors, and America saw fit to allow those people to live their life as they see fit. And maybe they're Jewish, maybe they're not, maybe they're practicing Judaism correctly, maybe they're not. That is irrelevant.
Look, I agree. I think that any sect has a right to practice its own faith. I like the Branch Davidians had a right to do it. Would I allow Islam? Yes, I would allow Islam.
Or Hindu sect wanted to.
Yes, I would. Absolutely.
I would too.
No, we agree on that.
I thought.
I thought it was
America should, like New Skverer.
Oh no, they have a right to do it.
Are honestly from the few exceptions in the whole United States. The Hasidic exceptions that the U.S. government has made in New York are basically one of a kind because they've been granted somewhat like a Native American.
Like a reservation. Sure.
Legal way.
They have their own government. They've got their own infrastructure.
But
like a Native.
There is no parallel besides for Native American settlements. And then, saying, did we just do that for the Hasidic Jews so that they would be able to preserve their life after the Holocaust? Or should we open that up as Americans?
No. Any group should have a right to do it. Anyone has a right to do it. If people want to be a communist and join a commune and move up to Idaho, they should be able to do it.
Supreme Court, like you're saying, if you had 20,000 Muslims and you wanted to charter your own town where everyone's going to be Muslim, the schools
I don't have a problem with that.
Well, you might not have a problem. I'm saying legally, the U.S. made exceptions to allow Hasidic Jews to do that. And whether we should continue to make exceptions or just make it the rule.
Why would it be an exception? Anybody has the right to.
We made exceptions for Hasidic Jews.
Well, first of all, I don't think it should be seen as something where an exception is made. If somebody wants to,
an exception was made.
A
town of 20,000 people in the U.S. that don't even speak English. It was because we made an exception.
Well, the point is, I don't think that we should. It should be viewed in that context. In that, for example.
Was it true or not? You have a town
let me just finish my thought.
That don't speak English.
Yeah, you have like in the 1960s, there were people who formed communes in upstate Vermont or Idaho that they were basically living like a kibbutz, like a communist lifestyle. They had their own community, they had their own distribution of their own wealth. And while that's not personally for me, it doesn't matter. I respect people's right to do that. That's part of being an American. We have a history of that. We have a history. We could go back into the 19th century and you see, the Brook Farm settlement in West Roxbury.
We made collectively as an Americans an exception for Hasidic Jews.
I understand that,
it's not like an American thing to do. There's not like towns or settlements.
Well, it bothers me that it would be seen.
Speak English and have set up their, are meant to preserve their way of life here in American soil. Like that's not an American thing. I don't think you.
No, I think it is an
still,
American thing, and
even the communes, like none of those still exist. Like,
well, yeah, but they had but nobody questioned their right to exist, and they did exist for many decades.
Well, they're like militias. They're saying like no,
sure,
like a militia, and saying white people don't have that.
Yeah,
right.
they had no, they can do that, and I don't like that, but yeah,
to the Supreme Court and saying,
you have like the Aryan Nation has a community like that in upstate Idaho in Coeur d'Alene.
I would say
they have a right to do it.
The U.S. made special exception to allow this to happen. New Square was done under Hillary Clinton and the educational all this stuff. It was made special exception.
All right,
it wasn't like they just like.
Well, I support that. I support that exception.
All Americans do and form some
no.
separate society where people speak a different language.
I support that exception for any group
of the U.S. government specifically because.
All right. Well, I think that. All right. Well, fine.
As a Jew, you think not even as a Jew, you're saying just your opinion is that that's a good thing.
Yes.
And I agree with you. Like everybody should be allowed to do that in America.
I agree.
But like no, I'm pretty sure that you can't do that. Like the only people in all of America besides Native Americans that have had the opportunity to do that are Hasidim.
Well, I think all people should, if they choose to do that, they should be able to do it. And people have done it. It usually doesn't work in the long run, but there is a history of that in this country, not just with the Native Americans. And
there's a whole mayor and legal system where English isn't the official language. I mean, on paper that everyone speaks a different.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think
I think it's like as someone descended from Yiddish-speaking people, like God bless America, thank America for helping preserve Yiddish culture even more so than.
I agree, but although I do think that
not made the same allowances for.
No, they haven't.
That America has.
No, they haven't. Israel, in fact, Israel has cracked down historically. They are very much homogenizing the population, and I do think that
the right of return question saying, does Shulem Deen deserve the right of return? And
to what? To New Square?
To Israel, you're saying that do these people from New Square deserve?
Well, they're Jewish. Of course they do.
Well, I'm saying to me, as a like a dark skinned, I'm not really dark skinned, but me like as an alternative Jew. That no, I don't.
No, they have the right to return if they have a Jewish mother.
With a stake in Israel, I don't think those people deserve the right to return.
The people from New Square don't?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think they deserve.
Why? They're Jewish. What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, you think they're Jewish, so you said
they have if somebody has a Jewish mother, then they are a Jew. I mean, under rabbinic understanding, and they do have the right to return.
To oppose that as someone like who wants to become Israeli. That like
Israel, you could take it up with the.
I could lobby that my fellow American Jews, like especially this and this group, shouldn't. I mean, it wouldn't be successful.
You could take it up with the chief rabbi of Israel, but that's.
You're saying unquestionably these people in New Square have a right of return.
In the same way that any other Jew does, yes. I mean, and I think that's under Jewish law.
In the same way, or more so, as Israel
equally.
Does it make sense that we're preserving European Hasidic heritage here on American soil? And saying, from America's perspective, maybe America's.
Well, first of all, in Israel, they do have Hasidic.
And what happened to Jews in Europe, of course, we're helping them preserve their traditions here on American soil. Doesn't Israel seem like a more logical place to do that?
Well, Israel does have Hasidic sects. No, Israel does have Hasidic. No, I didn't say it. No, Israel does have Hasidic sects. They have Bnei Brak. They have in Jerusalem. There's a major Hasidic population. I've seen it. I've been to Jerusalem. So have you. So they have Hasidic in Israel. I don't know what you're talking about.
They have some Hasidic settlements, but I don't think they have a whole town where it's ran.
What about Bnei Brak? Have you ever been there?
Yeah, Bnei Brak is a municipality outside of Tel Aviv.
I've been there, and it's very Hasidic.
But it's not. New Square is 95% Hasidim. Even Bnei Brak is only there's still secular people and
fine. I mean they have a people are free to be Hasidic.
If you went to New Square, you would be the only clean-shaven person there.
Well, I think you could say, okay, fine. We could bicker over how many people. I think there are certain neighborhoods in greater Tel Aviv that are like that. And they have certainly the right to be.
Like I was saying, I lived in Israel. I've been to these Hasidic places. You don't have places where Hasidim completely dominate. I mean, you have Orthodox areas that are dominated, might be 70% Orthodox, 50, 60% Hasidic, but it's not like New Square that's basically
Well, okay,
90,
fine.
95% Hasidic. There's
Fine.
nothing in
I
Israel
mean,
like that.
they're probably, I mean, I suppose if they really wanted that, they could probably set up a kibbutz. I mean, my cousin lived on a kibbutz, which was Orthodox. Everybody there was
whatever
Orthodox.
Israel let them. You know what I'm saying? Like, because there's a lot of
So in Israel, they couldn't set up a kibbutz if they wanted to, or a moshav. I mean, I have a cousin who lived on an Orthodox, modern Orthodox kibbutz, and everybody on the kibbutz was modern Orthodox, without exception.
Sect is different than.
I'm just saying. I mean, I think that if
sect isn't just Orthodox, like you're.
I understand that, but I think if
Hasidic sect means we have a way of doing everything.
Sure.
And if you're part of the group, you basically should do it.
You have to go their way of the highway.
Just
but
being Orthodox isn't enough.
I get it, but my point is that I think that if you had Hasidic Jews who wanted to get together and set up such a community in Israel, they could do it just like any other group that sets up a kibbutz. That's all. They have very substantial neighborhoods there. They have a lot of influence there. You know, something. By the way, an interesting comment. I mean, not to diverge here, but I don't know if you've read the works of Rabbi Marvin Anselman, the late Rabbi Anselman.
I still haven't. I've heard you mention him.
Very, very good books. I mean, to eliminate the opiate. And a comment that he made, and he lived half the year in Israel, half the year actually here in Providence, Rhode Island, where he was a chemist, I believe, and a rabbi. And he made an observation that actually was critical of Ashkenazi Polish Judaism, in that he pointed out that, and I don't know if I agree with it, but he said that the Sephardic communities historically, they were very Orthodox. They were completely Jewish. They identified as such, and they had a Jewish community. But at the same time, they lived cheek by jowl with Catholics and with Protestants, and they did business with non-Jews all the time, and they were completely comfortable in European society. But it in no way compromised their identity as Jews. And he felt that the Ashkenazic Polish community was shutting itself off too much from the rest of the world, from the non-Jewish world, from the secular Jewish world, and that they had become too insular. And the result was that there was actually a diminution in real faith and growth and development. And again, I'm not talking about this because I don't respect anyone's right to observe their faith either individually or collectively in any way they want. But it's simply an interesting social observation on his part, and I think that there's a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, so you say if you're as an American or as a Jew, and a lot of the people there's more Jews who probably oppose New Square than non-Jews. The support of New Square probably largely comes from non-Jews, but that most Jews don't think that those guys have a right to preserve their Judaism. It's largely non-Jews that are protecting those guys' right to preserve, their version of Judaism. But I mean, there's all sorts of.
Well, I mean, is New Square under some kind of siege? I don't think anyone's preventing them from existing as a community, either Jew or non.
They have some legal trouble. They had troubles with, I think their chicken slaughterhouse from their neighbors, like water. I mean, mostly with the local zoning with non-Jewish neighbors and the education. And most of the complaint about the education is coming from, Jews or even people that left the system.
Well, what's the nature of that complaint?
Well, I mean, the complaint, if you're, like Yafid, I guess, Naftali Master is a big name, but all sorts of Hasidim that went through the system and then, left becoming Hasidic and realized that they didn't have a good education. They're not qualified.
Well, that's like Shulem Deen.
Yeah, so say he, realized that he was unqualified, and he might have been misled. Mm-hmm. That the assumption in New Square that like any one of those guys who left was gonna easily instantly become a millionaire. Maybe they have a perception like that there, when in reality is that most of those people have less a chance to succeed. I mean, they might have light features. So it's interesting to see, how much does having light features really benefit you in America?
You mean that they could assimilate into the non-Jewish world, or?
Well, I mean, in New York City, having light features doesn't really help you assimilate. But you're saying that really people in New Square have less education and training for American society than
Right.
African Americans than
That's right.
anybody, and have very little chance.
Well, it's more
succeeding
difficult
unless-
because
I mean,
they some of them
some
don't
of them
even
are
have.
very smart and end up in business. Or they
Sure.
have, you know,
I mean, he
methods,
ended
but-
up okay. He was in computer science, but he said some of his colleagues, especially when they started to need to make a living, they couldn't even really read, or they could
Well,
not.
I mean, it was really Hillary Clinton. Maybe we could do a whole show.
Oh,
on this
interesting.
sometime.
I don't doubt
The
that.
Expert. I mean, Hillary Clinton turned it into a welfare state. The reason, Shulem Deen like that because his rabbis.
And by the way, that's a very
people
corrupting
conspired
thing.
with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, but don't you think, Dooovid,
to
that
turn New Square into a welfare
but
state?
don't you think that's a corrupting element? Like, for example, I recently saw a quote from
But I
Russell.
want to make one more historical point. Maybe you would agree with me.
Yeah.
That I would say likely throughout the majority of Jewish history that probably half of the Jewish community did not have the language skills to communicate with the goyim. They would say like, oh, Jews were always educated. They could always read in two languages, at least, Hebrew in the country. Is saying that's probably inaccurate.
Probably.
And even, like in Poland, certainly.
Yeah, especially
there was
in
a
the small
minority
village.
of Jews that even spoke Polish. Like during the Holocaust, people don't appreciate that those people had no common language to talk to each other in. And throughout most of Jewish history, there was probably a minority of the Jewish populations, mostly adult males, that were educated, some of them extremely well educated, and dealt with goyim. But probably half of the Jewish community, on average, for the thousands of years, not just in Europe but all over the world, they probably couldn't speak more than a few words. I mean, they're not like they're dumb, but saying that
I don't know. Dooovid, I have no
they
idea.
weren't protected, and they couldn't even speak the same language. If you're New Square and you say, I want to protect my religion like the Amish, and the best way to protect that is to not even speak the language that the Goyim speak. And that was always, I mean, if you look in our literature, and even New Square till today, because it's so hated by most Jews because of the sexism, but it's designed that way. Like the rabbis wrote in our
Well,
literature,
I don't have any problem
that you
with that.
purposely don't teach the women the language of the land. And like maybe
That's
the
their
past
choice.
150 years, it turned to where with public education that women get more educated than men. But historically, we purposely did not teach our women the language of the land. And in a Jewish society, it probably was only the adult males. I'm talking in Europe for 1,000 years history, and maybe you have a different impression. You think like 1,000 years ago in Europe, like all the women knew how to speak, French and all these various languages, or Polish and these languages.
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't know enough about it, but my impression is that generally speaking, Jewish communities going back to Roman times, right up through to modern times, generally did speak the language of the lingua franca of the host country,
educated males,
and even average people. Now, I think that might have changed.
Children that we maybe even encourage not to speak the language.
No, I think that might have changed in the Eastern European Pale of Settlement, which is really the Polish regions, where you had so many Jews in that region. At some point, that probably you had 80% of world Jewry living there. That there was no longer a need to speak the Polish or Russian or Ukrainian, that people could get away with just speaking the local language of their community because they never even left the community. But even in that context, I don't know if it was necessarily something imperative to preserving the culture. And there's an interesting book I read a while ago about Polish Jewry.
Well, intrinsic sexism, to say that we purposely didn't want our women.
Well, I was about to comment on that.
Today, that women, Hasidic women usually have better education than the men in secular.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Even in
we don't want our women being too educated.
Well, even in the Polish communities, according to this book I read, which I can't remember the name of, but it was pretty comprehensive. The model was often that the men would be kept in the community to study Talmud, while the women actually would go off and learn a trade, or they would go to like a fancy French college, and if you were wealthy, and they would become
urbanization. What about pre-urbanization? You're saying that you're talking the last 250.
I'm talking about the past maybe 300 or 400 years.
They didn't let women. There weren't any Jewish women doctors more than 200 years.
No, but the women were allowed, even in New Square, by the way.
Men. There were a handful of Renaissance adult Jewish males and like no women went to university for probably 500 years.
Well, I don't think anybody like, for example, going back to Shulem Deen's book, in New Square, even none male or female, they didn't go to university. And the young women actually were allowed to have a little bit more leeway in terms of reading secular books and having secular entertainments than the men. And there was one scene where he actually is visiting a friend, and the sister had these kind of secularish books, and he was kind of sneaking a peek at some of those books, and she's like, "You can't read those; those aren't for you." And yet, and that was in New Square, perfectly permissible. So I think that actually is even part of the tradition there, that women do have a little bit more leeway when it comes to those things. The men are expected to be strict Talmudic study, nothing else. That's their function.
Well, the big culture, like, I mean, to put it straightforward, it is going to be the sexual immorality, that you really have to completely cut yourself off from larger society. And this would apply to Hindus, Islamic, fundamental Christians. If you want to, like, New Square, where they're going to say, like, on the wedding day, 100% of their girls are in fact virgins.
Yeah, and that was what his wedding.
Possible in American society.
No, I mean, look, and that's, I respect that.
Said, okay, to modernize and to say, like, even if they speak the same language, and even now with the internet, like, God forbid, the power of corrupting Western culture, and even if you put it from a Hasidim wouldn't necessarily say it, but the Islam and Muslims say it. You go to the West and they turn your daughters into whores. God forbid. But
right.
If you're in New Square, you're looking at university, and most they say, like, your daughter's so smart, she could get into Harvard, and say, well, God forbid, what's the value of going to Harvard? They're just going to turn her into a whore. And even to use that harsh language, but he said, like, yeah,
no, I get it. I get it. And even in this book, I mean, he had not, his wife was picked for him. It was all arranged. He didn't know her, didn't meet her. They had one meeting before the marriage, and that was very chaperoned, where they basically sat across the table from each other for 5 or 10 minutes. And, that was that. And he knew nothing about sex. Nothing.
It's honorable and praiseworthy, and that's something.
I'm not looking at that.
You really, that's what Luke Ford always mentions. Saying, like, that most Orthodox Jewish men growing up in LA, when they get married, are virgins.
Yeah.
And statistically,
that's right.
Like, no, I mean, like, outside of Orthodox Jews, maybe Muslims, some fundamentalists, that's near impossible. And so, Shulem Deen's right there, saying that's why people like New Square, saying, because that type of
no, it's fine. I mean, I think it's actually, there's something very interesting about it. I mean,
in the U.S. and also, God forbid, they're very white in the sense, like, we were persecuted in Europe as a darker skinned people, but relative to America now, like, they're extremely white in New Square. That, like,
I don't know about that, but I don't really care. I mean, that's not interesting to me. The point is that
does it have something to do with why they're allowed to do it?
No, I doubt it. And I think that
they have more potential than black kids. Like, oh, they don't educate their kids, they have so much potential. And you're saying, really, people think that because they're white. If there's a bunch of black kids that weren't getting educated, and
they wouldn't think that. That's a point well taken.
Oh, these kids in New Square, like, the reason they care so much that they're that they're not getting educated and have so much potential is because so many of them have blue eyes.
That could be. I mean, I guess. I mean, if we must go there, sure. The thing is that the cultural element of, like, his meeting his wife for the first time on their wedding day, or just after having a brief meeting, he actually wanted to see if he could get a picture of her. Said, what do you want a picture of her for? That's ridiculous. That's not why you're marrying her. This is your function as a Jew to have offspring. I mean, this has nothing to do with relationships. That's like a American idea. That's a Goyish idea. This is what he was told. And, he knew nothing about, he actually had to consult with experts about how to have sex. He knew nothing. I mean, and neither did she. And, they had complete strict rules around everything.
He's like from the 0.2%. He's like from the 2% of Americans that hadn't seen pornography before the age of 16.
Yeah, right. But the point is that it's in a way, it reflects more traditional.
Like, it's some sort of, like, phenomenon you would only find at
it's
someone should be like 20 years old and hadn't seen pornography.
It's not mainstream American culture. But the point I'm making here is that it reflects, in a very broad sense, a more traditional culture that existed all over the world at some time. I mean, I remember even when I was a young man in growing up in a community, there was a young woman that I kind of befriended, and I went one day to visit her at her home and, to do homework together. And her parents were very frowning upon it. And they didn't really want me to stay because she came from a traditional background. She happened to be Greek, of all things, and that she would be marrying somebody from the old country at some point, and that they didn't want her to have male friends. It was interesting. I mean, there's nothing about me personally.
But it's from the Torah. I mean, the assumption is.
But the thing is that's a reflection of traditional societies.
It's a law that you could have. You said you didn't do anything, but there's a yichud there that if you were enclosed with a room and no one saw, that her husband could claim that she's probably not a virgin. That it's so disallowed what you did.
Oh yeah, no, that's traditional society.
That there could be a reasonable assumption that someone say that she's probably not a virgin. How do you know? Because one time she was in a room,
seen in a room with a man. I get it.
I mention that all the time because people don't really know our books. That in terms of gender segregation, men and women, there's almost nothing in Sharia law that doesn't come straight from the Talmud.
And by the way, as I said,
or Abrahamic, this Abrahamic law.
Look,
our ancestors, when we followed Abrahamic law, was probably similar to, maybe even Saudi Arabia.
Well, I mean, it reflects traditional Muslim society too. I mean, and traditional American society, Christian societies, very fundamentalist.
You could get kicked out of school for talking to a boy in an Orthodox girls' school.
Sure.
She could have been expelled for that. You're just a nice boy trying to help out with her math.
But no, I get it, and it's a very traditional. It's kind of even a universal theme. If you go to any culture, if you go to Japanese culture, it's probably not that different. These are traditional.
Gender segregation is a big deal. I mean, I went to Orthodox schools and gender, all boys schools, even as an adult. But then with Indians or Muslims in America. Most Americans have absolutely no idea how to handle gender segregation. Even the Hare Krishna temple near my house, they have gender segregation, and your average person just doesn't get it. They come in and they say all the women on one side and all the men on the other side, and most people, they're like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to.
Well, we have in America, we have the idea of egalitarianism, but the point is that
I think most places around the world that gender segregation is actually pretty common.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a traditional, conventional, even understanding of society, probably up till maybe about 200, 300 years ago when you started to develop egalitarianism in the Western societies. No question. Now, maybe in the case of Judaism, it might have been even a little bit extra extreme because in a lot of ways we were extra extreme in every sense because we're more strict to Talmudic law. But nevertheless, in the broad sense, it is not atypical of traditional societies to have that kind of separation between the sexes. So anyway, Dooovid, I want to bring up one more little thing here and this is a completely off the subject issue. It has nothing to do with Judaism, but it has to do with politics in Michigan, since that's where you are. A Michigan judge has now ruled that Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson was not conducting lawful activity when she decided, using a fiat rule as opposed to going through the state legislature, which is what the Constitution says you're supposed to do, Article 2, that she would change the laws with regard to absentee voting in her state. In other words, what she said was that an absentee ballot coming into the state no longer had to have such strict adherence to signature matching, so that when you have an absentee ballot, you usually have an application on file at the clerk's office in your voting district with your signature. And if you send in an absentee ballot, the clerk is supposed to match that signature to the signature that you use when you sign the absentee ballot. And if it doesn't match that signature, then it's not valid. And she lessened that rule by saying that it didn't have to match. It could be, she said, like faintly like the signature. And so thus she watered down the rules about signature matching. Now, that's bad enough, in my opinion, because that opens the door to forgery. But even if that were something that was appropriate under any circumstances, which I can't imagine why it would be, the laws about elections are supposed to be conducted by the state legislator in the open, with debate, with testimony, with witnesses, and with a vote. And that is in the U.S. Constitution. Article 2, Section 2 says that all election laws are to be decided by state legislators, not by secretaries of states, not by governors, and not by judges. And so now a local judge has basically stated this and has agreed with one of the contentions of the Trump campaign, which was that 4 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia, were tampering with election laws outside of their state legislators. So this vindicates Trump. Now, it's too late now. We don't know how many votes were creatively counted that had been absentee votes, and who knows who the clerks were who was deciding whether or not signatures had matched. But I think it's safe to say that it's another piece of evidence that, at least in Michigan, and I think it reflects a lot of states, that election had been corrupted. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you say that, like, because I hadn't looked into it, and trying to avoid too much election politics. Like, Jocelyn Benson is an extremely intelligent, ambitious woman.
Yeah,
and yes, she probably did purposely do this. And the one thing like Jocelyn Benson, as Secretary of State, is probably like below her pay grade. You're saying like compared to Governor Whitmer, like Jocelyn Benson is a much more qualified, intelligent person. Like she went to Harvard Law School. She was the dean of Wayne State Law School.
How left wing is she?
On the board of directors of the SPLC. Like
how far to the left is she, Dooovid?
Well, I think she probably purposely took this job below her pay grade to do what she did, and saying like it's not a big secret. Everyone knew that she was on the board of directors for the SPLC when she ran for the job.
Uh-huh.
It came out, there was newspaper articles about it.
That being the Southern Poverty Law Center, in case people
don't
know.
And it's saying like she's not dumb.
No.
And saying she went to Harvard Law School. She was the dean of Wayne State Law School, and she was like she had the job of personally handing out money for Stephen Ross. Like a huge billionaire, over $20 billion. Mm-hmm. That she quit Wayne State Law School to basically hand out money for Stephen Ross.
And who was she handing the money to?
Her, I mean, I guess she was an athlete, so she had some sort of athletic. You have to look into, but her.
I mean, what political groups was she giving it to?
It was actually athletic, like the foundation. Okay. But he probably gives money to his voting rights stuff also. Although Stephen Ross has more right wing lean, but I'm saying she was below her pay grade. She could have ran for senator. I'm saying like Jocelyn Benson's probably more qualified and intelligent.
Well, look, than
Governor Whitmer. Why she thinks this way, why this was her agenda. But like, yes, she knew this was what she was going to do.
That's
before
right.
She ran. She planned on doing it. She executed it. It was the SPLC's game plan, whether she came up on her own or some of the SPLC told her to do it, or whatever the strategy was. And legally, you might be right, and they might have known.
Well, a judge has not ruled this.
It was enough to get Trump out of office.
Yeah.
And even if they're vindicated now, and she'll be like,
it's too late now.
I made a mistake. And I don't think she's
oops is right.
She was the dean of Wayne State Law School. Even if you could demonstrate that
she
did this, knowing that it went against
Dooovid, I don't think anybody's.
I doubt she would even get disbarred.
No. I don't think anybody's suggesting that she committed a crime. I mean, that's not the point.
That, from what you said, like she really did mastermind this.
Oh yeah.
She ran for a job below her pay grade.
I don't know. Being Secretary of State is not below.
Changes. And what she did was instrumental in defeating Trump.
That's right. That's right.
And a handful of women basically defeated Trump.
They did.
She really probably hated this guy.
Yeah.
That she took
and she decided to take certain actions.
I mean, she had other reasons also. And obviously she thought like this probably, since she went to Harvard and worked for the SPLC. But she.
Well, first of all, yeah. Look, again, I don't think that.
You agree with my interpretation?
Well, first of all, I don't think that being a constitutional officer like Secretary of State is below someone's pay grade. It might be a stepping stone, but That's
definitely in terms of money. She's
well, sure.
She
could have made bigger money. Yeah,
$150,000 a year or whatever.
Well, I mean,
where she was just handing out money for a billionaire.
Well, the point is that she's a statewide. She didn't just take the job. I think she ran for the job and was elected.
She said that's what she was going to do.
That's right.
She successfully did it.
Well, thank you. I mean,
Trump's out of office.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been saying. I don't know how far we can talk about this on YouTube because I might end up getting another suspension.
She said exactly this when she ran for Secretary of State. She said exactly
what did she say?
What she planned on doing. This is why she ran.
What did she say? I'm curious.
Demonstrate how intelligent she is.
I mean, Dooovid, give me some details on that. When she ran for Secretary of State, did she say she was going to try to use her office to drive Trump out of office? I mean, what did she say? I'm sure she wasn't that blunt about it.
I think she might have been that blunt about it, but no, I mean, she did the SPLC talking points about expanding.
I know that she put a stop to any
voter protections, but no, I mean, she said specifically because it's Trump and
he's evil.
Republicans are doing this bad stuff. That's why she had to go.
And she felt perfectly right
in order to save America.
Yeah, in other words, she felt
use those words
no,
exactly,
but she felt perfectly morally justified to kind of fiddle with and monkey around with the law in order to stop
some billionaire.
Because this was a great, glorious cause. And she also put a stop to any audit of the Wayne County vote, even though there was enormous evidence and hundreds of affidavits which showed that there was major, major problems with the way that vote was counted in Detroit. So yeah, she's corrupt. And yet she's one of these people on the left who's
I didn't use the word corrupt.
I am.
Because she basically.
What could be more corrupt than actually somebody who's deliberately and consciously making laws that they know are not right?
And we knew this when she ran. Like she wasn't hiding it.
No, I don't think she was going to announce it quite that openly. I mean, I'd have to see that.
If she can't run for the purpose of doing this and win, what's the purpose?
Well, she didn't run. She didn't come out and say, "I'm going to change laws above and beyond my purview as Secretary of State." She just did it. And I don't think she particularly
said that she will use the power,
every legal power,
office to accomplish what she means,
every lawful power, which she didn't.
Dean of the law school. She's not going to.
Yeah, so she knew full well what she was doing, and she said she'd use every lawful power for office. But the point is that this particular monkeying around with election law was extra lawful. Now, again, I'm not saying that she's, maybe it's a balance of power issue between the state.
You're saying she deserves to be disbarred?
No, I didn't.
Or you're saying
I'm saying that she
won fair and square, and you're sorry you lost.
No, I'm saying that
she deserves to be disbarred.
I'm saying that she's on the wrong side.
Why are you saying she deserves to be disbarred? What you're
I didn't say that.
Why don't you say straight up she deserves to be disbarred?
Because she's involved in a balance of power issue between her office and the state legislature, and that these are things that both sides try to push the envelope on the other, and it's the job of each branch of government to balance the other branch and say, you're overstepping yourself, you can't do this. And in a way, I blame the state legislature as much as I blame her, because they let her get away with it. The point, and by the way, it's not just Michigan either. Pennsylvania, state legislators all over the country did not realize. This is one of the things we can learn from this election.
It's the inaptitude and incompetence of the Republicans in Michigan.
Yeah, they did not actually call this out.
They should have known that this
I
was
agree.
Exactly what she was going to do.
And they should have understood.
Any Republican, you just have to check the.
Well, the thing is that they didn't understand their proper role, constitutional role as a state legislature, and neither did the people in other states either, because they hadn't confronted this kind of thing before, and because they hadn't used those powers. And one of the lessons of this whole election is that local governments, state legislators, state reps, and state senators have constitutional prerogatives and powers that they need to exercise. And that includes election regulation, not leave it up to people who don't have that kind of power. Because if they do, then people who don't have that legal power, like a Secretary of State, is going to take advantage of it and take that power. Doesn't mean that she did something actually illegal. It means that they're exercising power in a vacuum. And, look, I do hold it against her, don't get me wrong. But the point is that now, after the fact, 2 months after the election, you finally have a judge who's weighing in and saying, hello, you can't do this. But it's too late. That's all I'm saying. I don't think that anyone needs to be disbarred, but it should be identified publicly and it should be called out. That's all. Anyway, Dooovid,
just to push back, you're saying that she stole the election, God forbid, and it didn't even call for her being disbarred. Like,
well, put it this way:
she stole the election.
She stole it.
Doing anything
She stole it fair and square because the other side didn't let her. They let her do it. The legislator did not stand up. The courts did not stand up.
Like,
the system was broken. So you had a person like that who could come in and monkey around with an election, and not have opposition to it. It's hard politics.
That's why she's a good lawyer. I mean, like the goal of a good lawyer is, like Alan Dershowitz, saying you're a defense lawyer. Your goal is to get the person found not guilty, and saying she did everything within the legal power to accomplish her goals, and largely she did that.
Yeah,
she could, I don't go on to be governor or senator if she wanted.
Probably could, and the question of whether or not she was operating in her legal powers. That's above my pay grade. I don't know that. I think that she probably was because
she's the Harvard or Shulem Deen.
That's right. She's a smart lawyer. It's like the Clintons. They always were a little step ahead of the law. They knew exactly how to maneuver in a way that would be a shadow of the law that they could technically not be. It's like what Bill Clinton said. It depends on what the word "is" means. They know how to use every little nuance because they're brilliant people. But that doesn't mean they're not corrupt. But they're legal, technically, if you look at a very thin line, they're just a little bit on the side of the law on that line to the point where they cannot be charged with something. But that doesn't mean
Passover next week. I mean, we still stream hopefully next Thursday, but anyone watching Passover, I believe, is next either Friday or Saturday night. So
all right, yeah, next week
something related to Passover.
Why don't we do? We'll talk about the meaning of Passover. That's a great topic. All right, Dooovid. Listen, thanks so much as always, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yep, looking forward.
Same to you.
Have a great weekend. Shabbat shalom.
Same with you. Thank you.